Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I bring you my top 10 mystery television shows of all time. And this is just my opinion here, but this was a very good idea for a video. It was suggested by multiple people for a long time now. And, this was a very tough list to configure. First of all, I have not seen every show I think could be in consideration. I have a long list in my to be watched pile, but I keep going back to my favorites again and again. And secondly, I did debate over whether or not to include series that are adaptations of books, and I initially did not, but then I changed course and I did decide to do so. So as long as they were actually TV series, and some of these, are debatable. Like, are they really truly mysteries? Are they truly television series? Some of these are just like more like TV movies in a serial form. It gets complicated, and there were just like too many split hairs. So I just decided to include, anything that aired on TV in some type of like episodic fashion. And, I don't believe I spoil anything here, so there's no need for a spoiler warning. But before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Starting off with a lot of honorable mentions here, and I'll start with the shows that simply just didn't make the cut but were close. These were all very, very close to making the list. There were a lot of shows adapting literary detectives either directly or just like using the characters in original mysteries. Inspector Morse, Lewis, Endeavor, the Inspector Allen mysteries, the 1989 Campion, a Dorothy L. Sayers mystery, the Adventures of Ellery Queen, the 1975 Ellery Queen, and the 1981 Nero Wolf were all in high contention. None of them made the list, unfortunately for them. I have the likes of Perry Mason, Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, Rosemary and Thyme, Luther, Columbo, Castle, Monk, the original Matlock, Wallander, which were all in consideration, probably a little less so than the previously mentioned ones. Some series I have never seen or haven't seen enough of to make a decision that I think it's possible some of you might expect to make the list are Only Murders in the Building and Twin Peaks, which I have never seen, and Le Petit Meurtre d'Agatha Christie, the French adaptations, and Diagnosis Murder, which I've only seen a handful of episodes, although I did enjoy them. And onto some honorable mentions that need like a little bit more explaining. This might be unpopular, but I've never been a fan of the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock series. I don't hate it, but I don't particularly like it either. Magnum PI is a show I love, although I do debate if it's like a mystery series in the same way these others are, so I just left it off the list. Sister Boniface, I think, has a lot of potential, but it's only had 2 seasons thus far, which I don't really consider enough to make the list just yet, considering it's still airing. CSI is a show I always loved as a kid, but as an adult, I'm not really into the whole like forensics thing, so I didn't include it. American Gothic wasn't really in consideration or close to making the list, but this was sort of like an unheralded mini series that I enjoyed. I did find the ending a bit of a letdown, but I thought it was worth a shout out at least. This next one is not really a mystery at all, but The Mole is a reality show where one of the players is sabotaging the others, and it's a mystery in the sense that you don't know who this person is. There's no crimes, it's not a murder mystery or anything, but I'm a big fan of reality social strategy games. They have a lot in common with murder mysteries, actually, and these final two are not series, but very good mystery plot lines from non mystery shows I wanted to shout out. Obviously, we have to have the classic Who Shot JR from Dallas, which is a show I love. It was before my time, but this storyline is so good. And, one of the best in television history, honestly. And then we have the spoof of that, Who Shot Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, which is my favorite show of all time. I had to include an honorable mention. Obviously, it's not going to make the list because it's not an actual series, it's just a two-part episode. But again, I wanted to shout it out here. All right, finally moving on to number 10. And this spot was the one spot I was not sure of. There were the top 9 were locked in, But there was one spot I debated over, and I did decide to go with the series I don't really see discussed a lot, but I have Whitechapel. And this show premiered in 2009 and was set in the present day, but was heavily connected to the Jack the Ripper killings when a copycat shows up. Rupert Penry Jones plays the protagonist, D.I. Joseph Chandler, and I really enjoy the series. It's 4 seasons and has only 18 episodes, or I guess 4 series, I suppose I should say, since this is a British show. But I'm just going to use the American jargon here. Sorry, it's just a lot less confusing. I think the series does such a good job connecting the past with the present through like the ambiance and the tone and the setting. It's very well executed on that front. The acting is superb. Sometimes I feel like the acting in mystery shows gets like a little corny and over the top, but that's not the case here. This is a very unusual and creative series. There are liberties taken with the original, like Jack the Ripper, but that's really par for the course, with that guy. But it's never in like an annoying way. I can't get too much into the series without spoiling a lot of things, but I love the characters, I love the mysteries. I think Whitechapel is a very solid mystery series. One I wish ran longer, but it's better to run shorter than become stale and terrible like other shows. So I have Whitechapel here at number 10. At number 9 is one of 3 or 4 of my selections that is still airing, and that is Midsummer Murders. And this is your classic British country village murder mystery. It's wonderful. The series originally starred John Nettles as Chief Inspector Barnaby, who is a literary detective created by Caroline Graham. And while the plot of the series is an adaptation, most of these other episodes, like 99% of them, are original mysteries, I believe. Nettles retired after season 13 and was replaced by Neil Dudgeon. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, who played DCI John Barnaby, the former inspector's cousin. I thought the transition worked. Obviously I prefer Nettles, but Dudgeon is pretty good as well. And, I don't think the show suffers at all because of it. And, we've had a number of cast changes as to be expected with how many seasons this has run. My opinion of Midsummer Murders is that this show is fantastic. I love the mysteries, I love the characters and the actors and the tone. I love the dark humor here, which, this series is full of. I do fear it's starting to peter off a bit, like a certain other show that is higher up on the list. I don't think Midsummer Murders has crashed at all, but I do feel like it's, starting to get further and further away from its roots and what the show is. And I know lots of people complain about how there's like all these new like changes made, having like introducing like people of color to the cast. That doesn't bother me at all. That's not what I'm talking about. And I know people have very strong feelings about this, but I'm not going to get into that. But I do think the plots and the mysteries just aren't as strong as they used to be. And I have not seen like the most recent episodes yet. I'm notoriously slow at catching up on series here, but I have no idea what the newest ones are like, but still, I think the point stands that maybe the show has gone on just a little too long, but the early seasons, I love them, so it's here at number 9. At number 8, I have a series that is entirely adaptations of novels and novellas, and that is Nero Wolf. And this is the 2001 A&E series starring Timothy Hutton as Archie and Maury Chaykin as Nero Wolf. And I remember watching this series for the first time and just being amazed at how well the spirit of the characters and the original stories were captured. Normally, producers sort of and directors, they like insert a lot of their own technique and their own flair into the story and just sort of like throw in some original elements, but this series really understands Nero Wolf and Archie and the others. This series is so focused on the character dynamics, with the mystery sometimes taking a backseat, but that's just like how it is in the novels. The production value of this was super high. It's fantastic, and it's very faithful to the novels and novellas plot-wise. There are tweaks and exceptions, of course, moving the timeline around a bit, which is something TV series kind of have to do. The books span, several decades, but you can't set the series all over the place. It needs a grounded time period. And I love how the show resisted the temptation to cut characters. I feel like today a producer is looking at like Saul Panzer and Ori Cather and Fred Durkin and thinking how he could save money by combining them into one person, or cutting like Lon Cohen, or combining, Inspector Kramer with Pearlie Stebbins. But that doesn't happen. This series is really, to me, the gold standard for Nero Wolf and for adapting, novels and short stories in general. There are similar series ranked above this one, but I do think this series really should be the roadmap for how to adapt a literary work properly. Now, the series only lasted 20 episodes, which is a shame. I wish it had gone on longer. I wish it lasted a decade and adapted every Nero Wolf work, but there are a lot of other Nero Wolf adaptations out there. And I have no idea why this series was canceled. And when I looked into it, like, neither does Timothy Hutton, who, in addition to playing Archie, was also a director. And he claimed this was A&E's top-rated show when no explanation was given for the cancellation, which seemed to come out of nowhere, which is a real shame because this was so fantastic. So I have Nero Wolf here at number 8. And at number 7 is another very faithful series of literary adaptations that is also my gold standard for this detective, and that is the 1984 Sherlock Holmes, starring Jeremy Brett as Sherlock and initially David Burke as Watson, but then for the majority of the run, Edward Hardwicke. And much of my commentary about Nero Wolf applies to this show, and this may seem trivial, but the two reasons why I have Sherlock Holmes above Nero Wolf are because Sherlock Holmes lasted longer and there's more competition amongst other Sherlock Holmes. Basil Rathbone is probably my favorite Sherlock Holmes, but that was in films, and Jeremy Brett is a 10 out of 10. And quite frankly, I think there's an argument to be made Jeremy Brett is better than Basil Rathbone. And like a certain other actor whose series is higher on the list, Jeremy Brett was extremely attentive to the original stories. He was a stickler for it, and the purpose of this series was to adapt all of Doyle's Sherlock Holmes works in a faithful manner, which they do accomplish with the stories they did adapt. Unfortunately, Jeremy Brett died before the entire works could be completed, so I think there's something like 20 or so stories not adapted by the series, and these are just all very well done, very faithful. Although, towards the end of the series, they did start like combining like two stories into one. I suspect this is because Jeremy Brett's health was obviously declining and they were trying to like squeeze in as many stories as they could. But nonetheless, this series is the gold standard for Sherlock Holmes, with the possible exception of Basil Rathbone. But even then, it's still Jeremy Brett here. So I have it at number 7. At number 6, and to be fair, I do think the show probably should be lower considering how far behind I am on watching the series, but from the seasons I have watched, I think 6 is more than appropriate, and that series is Murdoch Mysteries. And this is a Canadian series based on the novels by Maureen Jennings, which, I thought were fine. I mean, they're not bad, but personally, I did not like them a lot. And this series is set in the turn of the century Toronto and stars Yannick Bisson as William Murdoch. Much of is made of his like Catholic religion compared to the largely Protestant area. And the mysteries are very good. I mean, these are all, I believe, original plots. I always loved how occasionally real historical people find themselves in these episodes, and often Murdoch or another character would give them like that spark of inspiration that made them famous. For instance, an episode where Arthur Conan Doyle gets the idea for the Hound of the Baskerville. This is yet another show where all the characters and actors are fantastic. We have like Helene Joy as Julia Ogden, Johnny Harris as Constable Crabtree, Thomas Craig as Inspector Brackenreed. My favorite has long been Lachlan Murdoch as Constable Higgins. I really enjoy the setting as well. It's very unique to have this like Victorian era Toronto as a setting. Very rare not to have a UK or United States setting here. This is actually the only show on this list to be primarily set outside of the US or UK, besides like travel episodes and things like that. The reason the show isn't higher is simply because I'm way behind, like way behind. This show is on season 18, and I think I've watched only up to like season 7. I've been meaning to get around for it for a long time, but I just haven't. The last thing I saw, and this is actually a slight spoiler here, I suppose, was Inspector Brackenreed got beat up by like a gang or something. Whatever season that was, that's the last thing I saw. So I definitely think this show could move up quite a bit on the list, but I truly don't know since I haven't seen it for half the show. And I guess you could argue that I should have just left it off the list, but I really enjoyed what I had seen. And I think like 7 or 8 seasons is enough to get a form a pretty strong opinion of the show. So I have Murdoch Mysteries here at number 6. And at number 5, and this is not a mystery show in the same sense the other nine are, but I just had to pay tribute to this classic franchise. This is not a specific series, but the whole franchise. And again, you may laugh, but I actually think number 5 might not even be too low here. But given what it is, I did place it here, and that is the Scooby Doo franchise. And I mean, I'm 33 years old, and I still love Scooby Doo. I watch old episodes all the time. Scooby Doo was like my childhood. I had so much Scooby Doo merchandise that I still do, actually. And I think the franchise really has come to be like a very good mystery show. It's not just a simple cartoon for kids. There really are a lot of nuance here. And, if you start with the first iteration of Scooby Doo, which is Scooby Doo, Where Are You? There's a lot going on there. And then you can continue on through the decades to most of the major TV iterations like What's New Scooby Doo and Mystery Incorporated. And there are other series in there. The bad guy in a mask is sort of cliche, but it makes the point that the evil in the world is not supernatural, it's very human, which is a point that mystery authors had been making for decades. The bad guy is the greedy person in a mask causing all this terror and fear and consternation. There are messages in this franchise about friendship and trust. It's not just some like meaningless cartoon. And it also doubles, as that, a meaninglessly cartoon. A very fun show to watch just for the fun of it. And you don't have to have like deep dive into meanings and all that. Scooby Doo Where Are You was just an absolute classic. And decades later, we have What's New Scooby Doo, which is a more modern return to basics type of show. And the franchise did get a bit out of hand in the interim there, where you had all these like weird specials, and they would have like Scrappy Doo and do away with like Fred, Daphne, and Velma just to focus on Scooby and Shaggy, whom I love. But I think the show works best with all 5 of them. This is an ensemble cast, in my opinion. And then we have like Mystery Incorporated, which is a very good series that ran for 2 seasons, and I think they do like the monster of the week type thing as always, but there's also this like running storyline, so all the episodes were connected and it was really very well done. Although I think season 2 takes it a little too far at the expense of like the monster of the week. And there are other TV series here, but like those are the big 3 to me. There's also like a pup named Scooby Doo, which I always like. Velma, which I always hated. There was a TV series confusingly called the Scooby Doo movies, which I enjoyed. And Scooby Doo just brings me so much pleasure that I actually think maybe it should be even higher. But again, it's not a murder mystery or a mystery series in the same way the others are. So I just left it here at number 5. At number 4 is a series I've talked about a lot less than you would think from this channel, but I have here Miss Marple, and this is the Joan Hickson series. I've always looked at these as movies, but it really was technically a television series, especially earlier on. Joan Hickson to me will always be Miss Marple. This is another gold standard adaptation series, one that remains as faithful as humanly possible to the original without being too diligently so. The show was extremely careful to get everything right, and part of that was because Christie's daughter was hesitant to approve adaptation rights because her mother hated them. But this show is really the only live action adaptation of Miss Marple that gets the character right. Joan Hickson and production really understood Miss Marple and her character. They didn't try to go like extravagant or edgy like other Miss Marples were and would be. The only other Miss Marple adaptation that gets her right is the Japanese anime Great Detectives Poirot and Marple, which is another show that maybe should have been on this list, but I can't imagine there will ever be a Miss Marple better than Joan Hickson. And this is, not, this series also had a lot of recurring characters, like Dolly Bantry, Raymond West, Dermot Craddock, but they were not an ensemble. They only appeared when they appeared in the novels. They didn't insert them into every story. And when the show does make changes, they really only made necessary and minor changes when the text was lacking or just not up to par. There's a pattern emerging here that the best adaptations of novels are the ones that resist the temptation to put their own flair on things. And yes, some things need to be amended for the screen or because like another adaptation exists already, but what we get nowadays is a lot of like a producer saying, "Oh, this is my interpretation of Christie," and like, no, it's not. It's just an entirely different product. You slapped Christie's name on and borrowed like a few characters and like a plot point here and there. Miss Marple resists that temptation, and the series is all the better for it. So it lands at number 4. At number 3, and I should say the entire list here is very dicey. I think the top 9 really could have been in any sort of order, but at number 3 is a series I just talked about a few weeks ago, and that is Murder, She Wrote. And I debated over this one because of all the series in the top 10, I do think Murder, She Wrote has the most duds. But I don't look at those bad episodes as reflective of the series as a whole, which is very enjoyable. I won't go into like too much depth here since I just made a full review of the series, but I find it delightful. The type of mysteries vary a lot from traditional to cozy to thriller to adventure. You never know what you're going to get, and I always did find the mysteries to be satisfying for the most part. They weren't like all-time genius plots, but some of them were very creative, especially earlier on. And there was often a human element involved, some humor, some drama, some intrigue. The series is very versatile, despite its reputation as a cozy, which I would disagree with. And I think some production logistics were questionable, but I always enjoyed this series. The reason why I have Murder, She Wrote above the likes of Miss Marple and Scooby-Doo and these others is because this ran for 256 episodes, which when you have that many, you have a lot of good ones, I can excuse some of the bad ones. And I would also say Murder, She Wrote probably has a stronger enduring legacy than any of the shows I've already talked about, with the exception of Scooby-Doo, of course. Angela Lansbury is iconic as Jessica Fletcher, the English teacher turned mystery writer. I also love how almost memeable the show is nowadays. Cabot Cove is probably like the murder capital of the world, with like how many people get killed in this town of like 2,000 people. And there's also like this conspiracy out there of I've seen people comment on some of my videos on about this too, but of Jessica Fletcher. She's actually the real murderer because wherever she goes, like homicide follows. I suspect Murder, She Wrote will endure well into the future, and it's just delightful, so I have it at number 3. At number 2, I have a series that is based on a literary character, but doesn't actually adapt many of the stories with the character in them, and mostly giving us original content, and that is Father Brown. And of course, this is the 2013 series that is, at the time of this recording, still airing. And I think the first 7 seasons of the show are truly elite murder mysteries in every aspect. I love the mechanics, which were often very clever, and I love the characters. And I know this is Father Brown, and this particular version isn't really that faithful to J.K. Chesterton's literary Father Brown. Here he's played by Mark Williams, but I think this is still a very good iteration. The recurring characters are all original, except for the thief Hercule Flambeau, and I think the show does have a habit of sort of like sidelining the supporting characters, especially since the supporting cast keeps changing and it's very annoying. Often characters leave with no real explanation or send off, but the product this series produces is just fantastic, especially in those first 7 or so seasons. The second season episode, The Daughters of Jerusalem, is my absolute favorite episode. One of the best original episodes of any mystery series here. It's like Rear Window inspired, and he has like there's so much tension and humor and a really clever mystery in it. It really hits all around. But there are just so many fantastic episodes and wonderful characters here. I will say I'm starting to get a bit nervous for the future of this series. From season 8 onward, I feel like the mystery plots just aren't as good. I think the series is getting a little stale, to be honest, and basically all of the iconic supporting cast is completely gone, like Sid and Lady Felicia, and even Mrs. McCarthy has now gone back to Ireland. But nothing will ever really take away how fantastic this series was in its first like seven or so seasons. There's not really a dud, and even in the newer seasons, I'm not as high on. They still aren't bad. Like they're still very watchable and still very good. Father Brown is just such a fantastic show. It comes in at number two. And at number one is probably the series I suppose most people might have been expecting here, but it actually was very close. This was not a shoe in, and there's very little distance, in my opinion, between these top nine series. But at number one, I do have Agatha Christie's Poirot, and this is the David Suchet series. And I'm always left amazed at how spectacular Suchet is as Poirot. He truly brought Poirot to life by copying all of his mannerisms, and he nails the personality. Poirot's I often find get very camp, because they play up the funny foreigner aspect and sort of gloss over everything else. Suchet was extremely insistent about staying true to the iconic Christie created, and it's just not Poirot. For Hugh Fraser as Hastings, Philip Jackson as Inspector Japp, and Pauline Moran as Miss Lemon are all truly iconic in these roles. This was the ensemble cast for roughly half of the show's run. They would insert the likes of Miss Lemon or Japp in stories in which they didn't originally appear, and they would have to like stretch out some of the short stories, which they always did a marvelous job with. And the series gets darker and deeper in tone. Once it's just down to Suchet as the main cast. The others get dropped until the final season. But even when I didn't like the changes, I still mostly loved the product, and the episodes had really good production value. Technically, toward the end, they're basically movies. The series claimed to have done every Poirot work. It didn't, but it did like 97% of them. And I can't tell you how many times I've rewatched these episodes. This is the gold standard for adopting Christie. And yes, there are a few duds here. Appointment with Death is atrocious, cards on the table taken at the flood, but even then, those episodes are watchable. And with the exception of Appointment with Death, at least retain like the same basic plot. And no matter what, you're going to get a good cast of actors. The show always respected the original material. I've talked about this series in the past, and I just cannot lavish enough praise on it, so it comes in at number one. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of the list, and I'm sure I'll hear about other shows that I did not mention. Let me know in the comments what shows I missed that you think should be on the list. Next week, I have a full-length review of what is often called the world's greatest locked room mystery. I'm not so sure about that. I've never really thought about what's the greatest locked room mystery, but this is a very good one, definitely in contention. It's Ellery Queen's The Chinese Orange Mystery, celebrating its 90th anniversary in 2024, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.